indeed a great privilege to be here. You stole one of my introductions, though, about being related to Walter Martin. So I'll have to go ahead anyway. No, I'm not related to Walter Martin that I know about. But this does bring me into the fact that Walter Martin and I are a lot alike. Many of you know Latin, or the etymology of the word Martin. It means warlike, from the god Mars. Walter and I are fighters. I think we're fighting for the right cause. It's very interesting. There's been a lot of Martins that have been warriors. And I pair that with my name Paul, which means small. You're probably asking, why do you think you're small? Well, let me tell you a little bit about my background. You brought up another interesting introduction too, Augusta. So there's some people here from Augusta. Raise their hands. Well, I don't see any hands. Oh, yeah. Any people from South Carolina around the Edgefield area? Well, it's very interesting. The Martins came from the Edgefield, Augusta area. For you in Augusta, have you heard of Old Martintown Road? That's my ancestors. There was a James Martin who became a pastor, also served the Revolutionary War. His son Charles became a pastor. Let me tell you a little bit about Charles. Apparently he pastored before the days of temperance. And like all Martins, he was considered a big man. And legend has it that he could lift a full keg of whiskey above his head. And he would also preach standing on a whiskey keg. But the listeners disputed whether there was more whiskey in the keg or in his belly. So that was one of my great-grandfathers, Charles. My grandfather was a pastor. My father's a pastor. My brother was a pastor. And in a sense, I'm a pastor too, but I'm the smallest one of the bunch. So that's small. That's my name. I really feel that my expertise in coming to you tonight is not so much that I have a PhD, but it's that I was involved in an abusive cult-like church for 7.5 years. And in a sense, that's my PhD, beside the fact that I actually have an earned doctorate. Now, I am a preacher's kid. My father is a Methodist minister. By the way, he's 83. Ministers never retire. He still preaches. I was raised in an evangelical home. I graduated from Wheaton Academy. Was connected with Wheaton College. I went to Taylor University. And yet I got pulled into a group like this. And actually some of my best friends in this group were graduates of some of the better known seminaries in this country. Grace Theological Seminary, Dallas Theological Seminary, and I think Trinity. I knew some people from there. And some of my close friends were both graduates of Grace. In fact, they were both officers in the Vietnam War. Came back, got involved in this group. So it can really affect everyone. It affects me, and I think it's with that experience in mind that it has affected how I approach this topic. As I was thinking about what I was going to talk about tonight, I know what the topic is, Donald. Cults and mind control. I had to really rewrite my talk because of some recent developments. I know you went into some terms in your introduction, and I think just to clarify, let's have the first overhead, please. There's a lot of confusion about what brainwashing is. For you in the back, can you all read in the back there? Oh, well, yeah. Can you see it now? Well, I'll read it for you. I better get my glasses on here. It says, "Stop, Dennis. You are not being brainwashed." And Dennis's mother is washing his hair in the tub. Unfortunately, most of the people in the church today don't have a much better concept of brainwashing than Dennis did. Let's have the next overhead. These little cartoons, I think, illustrate a lot of what goes on in these kind of programs. Hagar the Horrible, he's looking at his little assistant there, and he says, "Never mind what's holding it up, keep hammering." And the Wizard of Id, "Who goes there? A simple man searching for truth and wisdom." He says, "You're getting cold." So I think that's, in some respects, defines what we're talking about better than the next definition. Next overhead, please. Oh yeah, I like this one. There's a meditator saying Valium, Valium, Valium. And the observers are saying it's his mantra or mantra. Okay, now we're into the actual definitions. Which, by the way, are from my book. A little plug from my book. The definition of a cult: traditionally, cults have been defined as any religious body that holds beliefs and practices clearly in opposition to historic Christianity as expressed in the Apostles' Creed, or Walter Martin said, it's a group religious in nature which surrounds a leader or a group which either denies or misinterprets essential biblical doctrines. Okay, that's one definition. Let's flip to the next overhead. Talk about destructive cults, and I'll just read from that middle paragraph so you know what I'm talking about tonight are destructive cults. Are those which tend to use extreme and unethical techniques of manipulation to recruit and assimilate members, and to control members, to control their thoughts, their feelings, their behaviors, as a means of furthering the leader's goals. Most cults are religious, but they can be political or psychotherapeutic. There's a controversy brewing in the Christian community, and I'm a part of that Christian community that has to take a stand on the definition of destructive cults. There are some out there that are saying there is no such thing as brainwashing or mind control. And some of my good Christian friends are going to be writing an article on that. Bob and Gretchen Passantino, which I have great respect for. I admire them a lot. Some are saying, well, we don't know. We just got to take a wait and see attitude. We're just sort of take a neutral position. And some of the people at CRI, Christian Research Institute, are taking that position. In fact, on the book table, I should have brought the book up here. There's a new book out by some of the CRI people on Waco, David Koresh. And in the appendix, they have a little thing on brainwashing and mind control, where they sort of take a neutral position. And there's some, like myself, and in particular Ron Enroth. You heard of Ron Enroth? A good percentage of you have. Say, no, there is such a thing as mind control. But basically, those that are poo-pooing the concept are first of all saying it's a secular concept. My answer is au contraire. It's a biblical concept. I think we see terms like that spoken in the Bible. Terms like bewitched. Terms like spell. Terms like oppression. And in 2 Peter 2:2, we have terms like destructive heresies. Paul was quite surprised after he had started the church of Galatia to find out that those believers had fallen to the Judaizers. He says, I'm amazed. He said, how could this happen? He said, who has bewitched you? Or who has cast the evil eye? The term doesn't appear in Scripture like thought reform or mind control, but I think you will see concepts in Scripture. To me, thought reform programs are the distilled essence of evil. No other thing in history can so utterly destroy body, mind, soul, and spirit. In one fell swoop, a thought reform program can destroy body, mind, soul, and spirit. Some of the critics are saying, hey, this stuff, this mind control stuff, is unscientific. It doesn't work. And here is what they say. They say, well, look, people join these groups voluntarily. They don't join this by force. My response is, of course they join voluntarily. No one joins a cult. Maybe one or two, and I'll tell you why they do. Most people are smarter than that. Did I really join the group that I ended up leaving? No. How many of you in here have been in a cult? Did you join a cult? Did you know it was a cult at the time? Raise your hands. Do I hear yes?
No.
Or no?
No.
Okay. My little survey is working here. In the literature, the early literature on thought reform, which was really done with the brainwashing programs in China, most of the research was done in people, the Chinese citizens that went to the revolutionary colleges. They weren't forced to go there. They went there. Most people were not forced to join the Nazi Party, the Communist Party. Most people that were part of David Koresh's Branch Davidians weren't forced to join. People that went to Jonestown in Guyana weren't forced to join. But I think what we're dealing here is the bait and switch of mind control. The fact that those that join do not know the fine print. Yes, I think they do join voluntarily. The second point is, the critics say, well, people leave on their own. People leave voluntarily from these groups. My response is, of course they do. In fact, maybe a lot of them do leave on their own. But the question is, why do people stay when the problems are so severe? When anybody in their right mind would see the problems. Why do they stay and continue to put up with the abuse year after year until finally something snaps or whatever and they leave? The third thing the critics say, these mind control programs aren't total. You can't totally control a person's life and a person's mind. And my response is, of course not. Whoever said you could? We all hear of many, many books written by political scientists on tyranny, totalitarian dictatorships. Again and again and again, we hear these writings. These groups aren't total. They don't totally tyrannize people. But that doesn't make the system any less a dictatorship, a totalitarian environment. Totalitarianism is never complete. But that's, to say it's not total is as silly as saying, since the flu doesn't kill everybody or make everyone critically ill, then there's no such thing as dangerous flu. Not everyone that gets the flu dies. Not everyone that gets the flu becomes gravely ill. But nevertheless, there is a concept of flu that we all have to be watching over. The fifth thing that critics say is that, gee whiz, people are happy in these groups. Not everyone in these groups are harmed by being in a mind control cult. And my response is, that's right. That's right. But there's more to it. You've got to ask, when are these people happy? Under what conditions are these people happy? First 2 years of my group, I was very, very happy. How many of you were happy for a time in your cult? Well, I'll be. The survey is working. The other thing is Robert Lifton wrote a book called The Nazi Doctors. He talked about how these normal German citizens, guardians of humanity and health, the sacredness of human life, could end up performing horrific, nightmarish experiments on people in the concentration camps. Did these Nazi doctors suffer? Were they unhappy? The horror of it is, they were not. They were not. The sixth thing the critics say, mind control is just merely social influence. It's like the Girl Scouts. It's like joining a monastery. It's like military boot camp. It's all the same. It's just strong social influence. And my response is, yeah, of course, it is social influence. But I think the history of the human language, the history of human experience, the Bible clearly entrusts into the reader enough sense that when they read about treating people kindly, they have a certain concept. And when the Old Testament repeatedly denounces oppression, they understand that people have a certain concept. Yes, social influence does run across the continuum from kindness to oppression. And what we're talking about is the most total oppression one can experience. Medical science, social science, is based on continuums. Take, for instance, the concept of depression. Yeah, everybody has a blue day once in a while and is low in energy and cries. That doesn't mean you're depressed. The more symptoms you have, the more severe the symptoms are, for a longer period of time, then you have depression. Any psychologist that's worth his oats knows the difference between depression and bereavement, or having a bad day. Social control is on the same kind of continuum. Now, the critics say, but this stuff isn't scientific. It's not in the literature. More and more we're seeing. You read about victims of terrorism, victims in captivity, victims of torture, victims of incestuous families, battered wives, victims of politically oppressive regimes, are consistently showing there's a common dynamic in these systems. Amnesty International evaluates many of these politically oppressive regimes on the basis of the early brainwashing literature. In one of the books I have for sale, it's a secular book by Judith Herman called Trauma and Recovery. She's a professor at Harvard, is showing more and more that these influence techniques, terrorism, captivity, torture, incest, battered wife, political oppression, and religious cults are basically the same kind of social dynamic. Critics will cite one study from Korea proving, at least in their minds, that brainwashing doesn't exist, it doesn't work. They cite a study where so many thousand POWs of our soldiers in Korea that came home, only a tiny few really became communists. Well, most of those studies were conducted, or most of those brainwashing programs were conducted on soldiers that were kept with other soldiers, other American soldiers, so that they could talk to each other when they weren't being interrogated. Another study that was recently declassified was on the biological warfare confessions of 80 pilots that were shot down in Korea. Of those 80 pilots, 83 or whatever, over 50 confessed that the United States had been engaging in germ warfare on North Korea. Over 50%, 50 out of 80. But guess what else? Not only did they confess, they believed it. They believed that it was happening. It was happening. So, for those of you that want to cite the Korean literature, cite all of it, please. The eighth point is the critics, the skeptics respond as though there was no history of oppression. We only have to see what a nation gone mad during Nazi Germany could do in exterminating millions upon millions of people. We only have to see a nation gone mad when the Ayatollah was the leader of Iran, that the mothers were sending their 8-year-old boys out into the minefields to be blown up so that the soldiers could proceed unimpeded. We've had Jonestown, we've had Waco, we've had many other tragedies in my own state, Ohio. We had the Lundgren murders. I could cite 10 or 15 more cases in the last few years where people have been killed as a result of cults. And the ninth point is ethics. What's right and what's wrong? Regardless of the percentage of people that are harmed, is it right to control a person's mind? Is it right to tell them how to think? Is it right to steal a person's mind? I think it's very interesting that little is said in defense of those who promote terrorism, captivity, incest, wife battery, political oppression. Only a fool would state that those who were in a battered situation, in an incestuous situation, that were victims of political torture, were weak, naive, and simply disgruntled former members. Disgruntled former members. But this is exactly what is being done today by, sadly, the church, by society. That the most victimized group of people in this nation are victims of cults. You're victimized in the group, and guess when you come out? Chances are, if you're like me, you get kicked again. Just a bunch of weak, naive, bitter, disgruntled members. Try that on a girl who is a victim of incest. Try that on a refugee who has fled political oppression. Try that on a battered wife. Yet we do it all the time to cult victims. The National Association of Evangelicals, the World Council of Churches, the National Council of Churches typically spend a large portion of their budget filing friend of the court briefs on behalf of cults, Hare Krishnas, Moonies, whatever. The church spends so much on the apartheid issue. We have refugee homes for victims of political oppression. We have homes for battered wives. But what is being done to help the culture? Just weak, naive, disgruntled former members. I think it's a tragedy. The Pledge of Allegiance in this country ends with something: freedom and justice for all. Freedom, liberty, and justice for all. I think that should apply to people that have been in cults. Well, what's this mind control stuff all about? Let's look at the next overhead. Well, I have a 3-hour version of this talk. I don't think you want that tonight, so how about a half hour? Sound good? Okay, these are the 8 points that are typically seen in a mind control regime. Number 1, milieu control. Control of communication within the group and outside. In other words, there's a control of communication. I'll get to these later. Don't frantically take notes. You can study this in your heart's content for years after this seminar. Mystical manipulation. To claim divine authority and spiritual advancement allows the leader to reinterpret events as he or she pleases, to interpret common everyday experiences as having supernatural qualities. Demand for purity. The world is viewed in black and white, and guilt and fear are common motivators to get the group to constantly strive for perfection. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Next, the cult of confession. There's a system of confession in these groups where serious and not so serious infractions are confessed either formally or informally. You're constantly having to tell people what you're thinking. And if you're not thinking the right things, then you've got to confess it constantly. Okay, next. The sacred science. The group is the ultimate truth. You can't question it. You can't dispute it. Loaded language. The group has its own vocabulary, its own jargon. And the purpose of that is to terminate thinking. Terminate thinking. doctrine over person. The experiences that you have, I better not do that again. The experiences that you have in the group have to be subordinated to what the group teaches. In other words, I don't think this is right. Well, the group says it is right. So you gotta cut it off. Dispensing of existence. The group has the right to decide who can and who cannot exist. Usually held not literally, but more and more we're seeing groups that hold it literally. If you don't obey, we will kill you. We'll kill you. Fully 15% of the people that I work with at Wellspring have come from groups as dangerous, as militaristic as the Branch Davidians. Did I know about this group before it hit the newspaper? No. Here, I'm a professional. I deal with this stuff every single day. Do I know about all the groups that are out there? No, I would say fully 70 or 80% of what we deal with comes from a yet brand new group that no one ever heard of. Okay, that's mind control. End of talk. No. I'm going to explain how it works now. Next time. You can make sense out of that. I'll try to explain that. Another little definition I come up with to explain mind control or thought reform. If you're taking notes, you might want to write this one down, whether you like it or not. It's the final common pathway to power and control. It's the final common pathway. In other words, any leader that's after power and control, if he's, I hate to say good, if he's effective, he will stumble across these techniques. I don't know how many times I have had the question asked to me, did my cult leader study this somewhere? And I've dealt with people from probably now 70, 80, 90 different groups. And every one of these people say, gosh, that's what my cult leader did. How did they do this? It's the final common pathway to ultimate power and control. So how does it work? Okay. The first thing that happens in these regimes, you see that little box at the bottom that you can't read? It's the sacred science, and there's a couple arrows going over that funny little face. The group is giving you something. Just imagine that's like an electrical cord that you're plugged into. People interact with cultic groups just like they interact with, the Girl Scouts or the Kiwanis or your ladies' prayer circle. We join groups, we stay a part of groups at first because groups do something for us. They give us some sort of approval. Cults are no different. In fact, in some respects, cults are better. Sometimes cult people are the nicest, most loving, most friendly, most giving, most sacrificial, most dedicated people you'll ever meet in your life. So if it feels too good to be true, and it sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true. These guys are good. Or these gals are good. Maybe I should say effective. There is a law of human behavior that's true no matter if you live in Atlanta, Georgia, whether you're a member of this church or not, whether you came from the jungles of South America, New Guinea. It's called the law of reciprocity. And what does that mean? It means if somebody does something nice for you, you're beholding to them. You feel gratitude, which means if they ever ask you to do something, you will do it. And that's kind of how the whole ball starts to roll. Simple, basic social psychology 101. They do something nice for you. So then they might say, come to our next meeting, to a Bible study, come to a weekend retreat or whatever it is. Or can I come over to your house or whatever. As time goes along in the group, the member begins to get a picture. And that first picture that emerges is the sacred science. The sacred science is, gee, these guys have the truth. It's okay to say these guys have the truth. I believe that Christianity is the truth and the only truth. There's only one way to the Father. That's through Jesus Christ. I believe that. But when a cult says we have the truth, look through the window and see what's beyond that. There's a couple of things that sets theirs apart from legitimate Christianity. Number one, when they say they have the truth, you don't ask questions. It's true because the prophet said it. It's true because the man of God has spoken it. Or whatever. You can't question it. You can't test it. Now St. Paul said, hey, listen, it's just not my opinion. You know, there's 500 people still alive saw Jesus rise from the dead. You know, you can find the bones of Jesus, well, is he drinking there? Or, you know, it's an open book. It says it's not hidden. Check it out. Check it out. Look at the facts. Even Jesus said, hey, there's witnesses to bear witness of me. Here's a verification. That's point one. Here's another thing that's different about the sacred science. That goes into the definition of totalism. Cultic groups tend to have a sacred science teaching for everything. What you wear, that's not so bad. But it becomes into everything that what you wear has a spiritual meaning. Okay? Everything has a spiritual meaning. In other words, how many of you people that came to the group tonight looked at your clothes and said, is this spiritual? In cultic groups, everything becomes regulated. When you eat, what you eat, and each cult has a different mix. You know, it's a different mix, but it all comes out the same poison. Some groups emphasize diet. Some groups emphasize clothing. Some people emphasize what you do in your free time. Like it's not spiritual to do anything except come to another meeting. That free time is sinful. In other words, the more that group begins to regulate every area of your life, the more it is cultic. Now, that sacred science has a couple of implications inside. The doctrine over person. That is, eventually, if you started out as this nice, big, juicy red apple, you entered the group, the doctrine starts to squeeze you. It says, isn't this good? Aren't you happy now? In other words, you have to be remolded into the group. And my wife and I, we never even studied mind control when we left. We left. I figured out about mind control years later. But we figured out this doctrine over person stuff because of one little joke we would play on each other. And that joke was this. Everybody had their mask on. We knew that all was not as it appeared. That the people that seemed to be happy were not so happy. The people that seemed to not have any doubts had lots of doubts. Let me just give one example of doctrine over person. I could give, like I said, I'm not giving my 3-hour talk tonight. Introverts and extroverts. You all know what those basically are? Say yes. Okay. Yes. Introverts are shy and they like to stay home and play with their computers and listen to classical music. Maybe have a few people over at their house twice a year. Only if they really know these people, if they're not strangers, they've known them for 47 years or whatever. Extroverts, they like to knock on doors. Say, hi, I'm from such and such church, and we want to invite you to the church and everything. Thank God for extroverts. Thank God for introverts. Who writes all those commentaries? Who writes all those books in there? I'd say most of them are introverts. A few exceptions, I'm an extrovert. If you're in an evangelistic cult, if you're an introvert, and you're like this about bringing in recruits, brother, you don't have enough faith. You need to have boldness in the Lord. Maybe this guy is never going to be a crack shot evangelist. Maybe he's not the kind of guy to get out there and knock on doors. Maybe he's better writing up some Sunday school curriculum or whatever. But that becomes a spiritual issue. You see how the doctrine comes over the person, makes that introvert feel guilty, feel sinful for his God-given. Because you can't change it. You're born this way. You're born an introvert, you're born an extrovert. Research after research shows it. Yeah, you can modify it a little bit. You can be less shy, but you're still an introvert. But let's say the cult is the opposite. Where the cult leader has a meditative community out in the wilds. And the great spiritual good is quietness and solitude and contemplation. An introvert's heaven, right? What if there's an extrovert in this cult? He wants to go down to the local restaurant or the local bar. God forbid. Not to drink, just to meet people, He's missing the true spiritual path. The quietness and solitude and contemplation. And he is made to feel guilty. I could give more examples. Then, kind of the flip side of that is the loaded language. If the doctrine over a person is pushing you in, you want to push back out a little bit. The loaded language comes in there and blocks that. Those are these little thought-terminating cliches that bring music into my ears. Brother, are you questioning? This is disrupting unity. I sense a divisive spirit. You have the spirit of divination. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. I mean, that just... I am bad for questioning. You know what I found out? My own experience. Most all that questioning stuff that I had, that they said was divisive and intimidating, was the Holy Spirit.
That's right.
They talk right is wrong and wrong is right. It's very interesting. In other words, thought-terminating cliches stop you from using a great gift that God gave you. That's your mind. Nowhere does the Bible say, don't use your mind. You're to love the Lord with all your mind. The Bible says, consider the heavens and the earth. Think about these things. Consider this, consider that. When Jesus said, beware of false prophets, and I took this from Martin Luther, his sermon on beware of false prophets. How can Jesus say that unless he expects you to use your head and figure out who's the false prophet? Use your mind. Okay, so you're getting the package. You know, the nice little spaghetti dinner and the warm hugs and the smiles and the love. The people came over, mowed your lawn, did your laundry for you, painted your house. All of a sudden you're there and you got the sacred science. You got the doctrine of the person. You got the loaded language. And you're having doubts. And in our group, when people were having doubts, they would come up and say, oh, I'm just struggling with the Lord today. He's teaching me some wonderful lessons. Yeah, but we never listen. We're never trained to listen. Another thing that comes in there is mystical manipulation. This is so important. So important. 7 minutes. Okay. Mystical manipulation. Imagine a big syringe in that guy's head with a needle. Okay. Direct cerebral injection. Nice graphic illustration. And label that buzz. I don't know how many people said, gee, I used to get such a buzz when I was in this group. I just don't have that feeling anymore. You know, I miss the fellowship so much. Usually after I've heard 200 or 300 people say I miss the fellowship so much, you get behind that, what they're saying is that they miss those feelings that these groups are so good at giving. The first 2 years of my life in that group I was in, you know, I don't think when the soles of my feet ever wore down on my shoes, because I was so high, just floating all the time. Felt great. Worked 18 hours a day, loved it. I was one of those happy cultists for a while. But then my body just finally gave up one day and said, ah! I lost 65 pounds. Was in the hospital for 11 days and was fed through the veins. That's what the buzz will do to you. But what happens with this buzz? It becomes addictive. Just like drugs. Some of those same people in cults that were so against drugs were just as hooked on the high they got in the group. You know, these groups can do the high in many ways. Testimonies, good speakers, good music, especially music, sometimes healing services. None of these things are wrong. Don't get me wrong. None of these things are wrong. Not that it's mystical, but it's manipulated. It's wrong in how that experience is manipulated by the leadership. When they say, this means that we have the truth. And we're the only group that has the truth. Whereas the cult down the road is doing the same thing. And their leader says, this means that we have the truth. The other way it's manipulated is that feeling becomes equated with how close you are to God. these feelings are meant to be. After you come out of a revival service or good sermon, you are to feel great. Fantastic. The human body just can't keep that up. So we begin to feel guilty that we don't feel that way all the time. We say, oh my goodness, something is wrong with me spiritually. Okay. During all this time, a wall is slowly getting built up around you. People on the outside are worldly. We used to call them 98%ers, or didn't have the vision. Especially, they just don't have the vision. Some good people out there, but, or some are much more obvious. They're satanic, your folks are the devil, don't go home at Christmas time, whatever. So the teaching, you start to look at these people as weird. They're on the outside. And I worked in a lab where they had hoods, not like the movie Boys in the Hood, but hood where you have these toxic substances. And they have little gloves, so on the inside, stick your hand through there and start manipulating all this stuff. You know, that's what we did here in the group. All the people on the outside had to be decontaminated. Well, we could bring them into our antiseptic environment. It's the only place in the world that had truth. The trouble is we begin to see people as objects when we do that. But to the other ways, you know, some groups censor what you read, what you do with your vacations. Some people keep you so busy with activities that you just don't have time to see what's going on in the world. And then if you're getting a big buzz out of the group, why are you interested in that anyway? It feels so good there. So that's mainly control. So there's a wall being built up around you on the outside, and there's a wall being built up around you on the inside. What does the group want out of you? Basically two things. Yeah, if you make a mistake, confess it. Usually a lot of these groups probe you, see how you're doing. Well, how you doing, brother? How you doing? Which means confess it. And then if you have a problem, what's the solution? Do the sacred science. Whatever the sacred science is in that group. So no matter what problem you have, it's very easy to learn how to counsel in a cult. So I was a leader in our cult. No matter what you say, no matter how you say it, it all boils down to this. Try harder. Just try harder. We have all the answers. If there's any problems, it's with you. Just try harder. Read more, pray more, believe more, evangelize more, fast more, speak in tongues more. Did I forget anything? Disciple more. More and more of the same. And it doesn't work. There was two periods of my life. Period A, period B. Period A was when I backslid in high school. They talk about backsliders, wine, women, and song. Well, it was wine, women, and hot rods for me. As a Christian, the Holy Spirit could tolerate so much before I was so sick of that, I couldn't stand it. I got back with the Lord, and then I was involved in the Try Harder study as a leader, as an elder in our group, like a pastor. Praying, evangelizing, discipling, evangelizing, praying, reading the Bible, constantly. The more I did, the more inadequate I felt. I would go into my room at night and weep because I could tell I didn't do this very good, I didn't do that very good, and I was doing it 18 hours a day, and it wasn't enough. And then the final thing is the switch, on and off. If you're doing good, they keep sending you some approval. if they reject you or you walk away because you feel like you failed, what's left? They've taken away the outside. You don't trust them. They've taken away your inside. You don't trust yourself. And the group's gone. What's 3 minus 3? 0. Goes back to what I was saying before. Nothing has the potential of destroying you so totally. Body, mind, soul, and spirit. So when I left, as many of you that have left, you felt like there was nothing left. So many people that I worked with this girl for 3 weeks. And she was so resistant at first. She wanted to be there. There was a part of her that wanted to be there, that wanted help, but wouldn't tell me the whole story. Finally, one day, she was sitting on a couch in our counseling session. By the way, I don't use a couch in counseling session. It was a couch in the room. She went over and sat on it. She pulled her knees up, put her head down on her knees, and she wept. She said, I feel like I've been murdered. And that speaks so much of the victimization of mind control. Nothing destroys so much. So that is the story of cults and mind control.